The crystalline architecture of the grand conclave hall of the Kyler hegemony seemed to absorb all light, reflecting it back as a cold, prismatic silence that pressed down upon the assembled delegates. Towering above the central dais, where the high censor stood shrouded in shimmering, reflective robes, the holographic projection of the disputed sector pulsed a sickly, unstable crimson. For 3 cycles of the inner luminaries, the debate had raged, a slow, agonizing dissection of an anomaly that defied all known cosmological constants. The boundary of the Solarian exclusion zone, the domain claimed by the nascent, technologically volatile species known only as Terrans, humans. Elder Vexter, his chitinous limbs folded tight in an attitude of rigid disapproval, scraped his mandibles audibly, the sound magnified tenfold in the acoustic dampening fields surrounding the floor. "We have analyzed the sensor drift data for the 4th time, esteemed colleagues," Vexter declared, his voice a low, resonant thrum that echoed the deep space vibrations of his species. "The energy signature emanating from sector designation Terra Prime remains an ontological impossibility. It is too clean, too structured, its entropy signature aggressively managed. It suggests not merely advanced energy manipulation, but a complete mastery over the fundamental principles of localized space-time organization that borders on the arrogant." Around him, the representatives of the hegemony's constituent empires shifted uneasily, their myriad forms, the serpentine Ophidians, the bulky, gravity-adapted Thraxian proxies, the ethereal, light-based lumina, all united by a single, gnawing uncertainty regarding the species that had suddenly, violently, and inexplicably drawn a line across the galactic map and dared to call it inviolable. The high censor, whose true form was known only to the highest echelons of the hegemony, shifted the projection. The crimson faded, replaced by an infrared schematic detailing the construction of the boundary itself. It was not a passive field, nor a weaponized barrier, but a network of intelligently deployed, interconnected structures, vast, inert, yet radiating a passive, unyielding presence that choked off standard FTL transit lanes. The initial reports suggested a localized quarantine failure, perhaps the desperate maneuver of a species facing internal collapse, the censor stated, the synthetic resonance of his voice layered with official skepticism. But observation indicates the opposite. Their internal energy consumption fluctuates with unnatural precision. Their waste heat signatures are non-existent when observed passively. They adhere to principles we discarded millennia ago as inefficient fantasy. They do not merely use power, they refine the fabric of energy use itself. Ambassador Xylos of the Ophidian Synod, whose people prized subtlety and political maneuvering above all else, coiled slightly, a motion that suggested deep, corrosive doubt. "Censor, this obsession with efficiency is secondary to the primary threat, adherence to a spatial claim. The hegemony has expanded based on principles of manifest destiny and measured assimilation. This species, these humans, have issued demands, delivered via compressed electromagnetic bursts that took our decryption matrices nearly a standard year to even begin cataloging, demanding non-intrusion within a radius that encompasses vital warp conduits leading to the outer rim territories. This is not the posture of a species seeking dialogue. It is the posture of a predator marking its territory." A collective murmur swept the conclave. To be marked by a predator was one thing, to be challenged by one whose technological baseline was so utterly unknown was another entirely. The Thraxian delegate, represented by a massive, slow-moving obsidian automaton tethered to the floor by gyroscopic stabilizers, finally responded, its synthesized voice grinding like tectonic plates shifting. "The data remains incomplete. Their vessels, those few that have been observed attempting reconnaissance near the periphery of the exclusion zone, are slow, inefficient in traditional thrust mechanics, relying on archaic kinetic propulsion systems supplemented by localized gravimetric distortion. They lack cohesive warp drive signatures. They are by all metric standards primitive. Why then this territoriality? It suggests either profound ignorance of the known galaxy or an internal strength so absolute that they do not perceive the need to keep pace with conventional advancement. This was the crux of the philosophical deadlock, the human dichotomy. They seemed technologically stunted in areas the hegemony considered essential: FTL travel, large-scale energy projection. Yet their static defensive grid, the silent declaration of their boundary, suggested an overwhelming, untouchable power source they kept utterly hidden. We must consider the possibility that their technology, while Aesthetically crude, operates on principles we have yet to encounter, the censor interjected, his voice hardening marginally. The reports detailing the single intrusion attempt by the scout vessel Vigilance must be scrutinized again. The Ophidian vessel, equipped with the latest generation of phase disruptors, did not register an offensive response. It registered correction. Vexter leaned forward, the crystalline floor momentarily darkening beneath his weight. Correction, censor. The Vigilance reported a localized, immediate cessation of all internal power generation, followed by a forced, gentle realignment of its trajectory 20 degrees off the exclusion vector before its systems were allowed to restart. No blast, no energy signature, no destructive force. Simply, redirection. How is this achieved without breaching the hull or overwhelming the primary shielding matrices? It defies the principles of force application. The silence that followed was thick, heavy with the scent of ozone and fear. The unknown, especially when it possessed the capability to casually violate the integrity of a hegemony vessel without hostility, was the only true terror in the galaxy. The sensor activated a deeper data stream, projecting holographic schematics of the human vessel's interaction. The detail was unnerving in its clarity. The Vigilance, an impressive vessel by Ophidian standards, simply encountered a wall of absolute inertia for a fraction of a standard minute. Their defense is passive until provoked, yet their passive defense is absolute, the censor summarized. We interpret this as arrogance. They do not fear our fleets because they do not perceive them as relevant threats to their defined space. This suggests two possibilities. Either their internal defense capabilities exceed anything in the hegemony's archives, or they possess a strategic concept that renders fleet engagements obsolete within their sphere of influence. The Lumina representative, whose form shimmered like heat haze, pulsed a series of rapid, complex light patterns, translated by the Conclave's universal matrix as a highly agitated query. If they are so powerful, why have they not sought expansion? Why this isolation? Precisely the mystery, Vexter conceded, a note of profound weariness entering his voice. We have observed their development across the last 2 centuries. They transitioned from primitive orbital capabilities to establishing this boundary network in less than 100 terrestrial years, a pace that rivals the Thraxian colonization rate, achieved without the benefit of systemic infrastructure sharing. They developed warp-capable transport after establishing the exclusion zone. They look inward, not outward. They are mastering their own limited system with terrifying focus, and then they draw a line, demanding that the established powers of the galaxy respect it. The political fear crystallized. If humanity possessed the capacity to enforce such a rigid barrier without visible effort, what would happen if they decided to move that barrier? What if their isolation was not fear but preparation? The censor, sensing the political fabric tearing under the strain of uncertainty, delivered a judgment that settled like cold dust upon the delegates. We have exhausted the models of offense and defense. We must now engage the final protocol. The hegemony cannot afford a military engagement against an unknown strategic doctrine. We will attempt diplomacy. The protocols for first contact with an isolated, self-defined power are stringent. Ambassador Jax, you will be dispatched. You will approach the boundary, you will request audience, and you will present the hegemony's position with measured respect, emphasizing the primacy of established interstellar stability over unilateral boundary claims. A wave of confusion rippled through the chamber. Diplomacy? To treat this aggressively isolationist species as an equal, Xylos, the Ophidian, hissed in protest. Censor, this grants them legitimacy. We will be setting a precedent that invites every minor power to stake claims based on fleeting technological spikes. We are not granting legitimacy, Ambassador, the censor countered, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying the weight of imperial decree. We are acknowledging the potential for catastrophic miscalculation. If they are primitive, a clumsy approach invites destruction. If they are beyond our comprehension, a forceful approach guarantees annihilation. Jax will proceed with the most advanced, non-threatening diplomatic cruiser the hegemony possesses, the Arbiter of Concord. He will carry the standard array of cultural exchange artifacts and the formal petition for negotiation regarding transit rights. He will not carry offensive armament beyond standard defensive screening, a gesture of profound trust or profound folly, depending on the outcome. The gravity of sending a single, unarmed vessel to the very edge of. This silent, self-imposed quarantine was palpable. It was the hegemony's final, desperate gamble, to meet mystery with calm, professional inquiry, hoping the humans valued order as much as they valued their solitude. The fate of the adjacent hegemony sectors, dependent on those choked warp conduits, now rested on the success of this singular, terrifying outreach. Ambassador Jax of the Kyler hegemony was a being defined by patience, a necessary attribute for a species whose lifespans measured in geological epochs. Yet, as the Arbiter of Concord slowed its inertial drive at the recognized limit of the Solarian exclusion zone, a boundary marked not by flashing lights or aggressive energy signatures, but by the sudden, impossible cessation of background cosmic radiation noise, even Jax felt the corrosive press of true dread. The ship's bridge, usually a hive of serene, multi-sensory data streams, was dominated by the visual display showing the boundary. It was not a barrier, but a nothingness constructed of perfect vacuum, delineated by geometric points of impossible stillness. There was no energy bleed, no gravitational distortion, only the sharp, clean edge of existence as they knew it abutting an unknown parameter. "Maintain position Delta 90, Jax commanded, his voice modulated to a pitch that conveyed absolute, unwavering composure, even as the internal diagnostics flashed amber warnings regarding anomalous localized quantum entanglement within the hull plating. He addressed the sensor chief, Xyler, a being whose specialized neural net allowed for the instantaneous processing of multi-spectrum data far beyond the capacity of standard Kyler interpretation. "Report on the transmission reception." Xyler rotated its optical clusters slowly. "Ambassador, the initial diplomatic burst, the hegemony's formalized, layered petition detailing cultural parity and offering comprehensive technological exchange for managed transit access, was received precisely 12 standard hours ago. The silence since has been absolute." "And the expected response window?" Jax prompted. "The standard response window for a species of their presumed development level, factoring in the necessity of full data integrity checks and internal bureaucratic review, should have closed by now. They possess the processing power to analyze our language structure in less than a solar rotation. Their silence is not delay, it is deliberation. It is measured." Xyler paused, its internal processors cycling through possibilities. "Or it is acknowledgement of receipt, coupled with a decision to ignore the petition entirely." Jax straightened his silvery, segmented carapace. "Ignore suggests superiority, Xyler. Deliberation suggests assessment. I prefer the latter. Initiate the secondary sequence. Broadcast the visual cultural primer package. Keep the energy modulation below the threshold of potential irritation. Let them see not a challenge, but an offer of shared complexity." The Kyler Cultural Primer was an astonishing achievement in condensed information transfer. A cascade of art, science, philosophy, and history designed to convey the immense cultural weight and stable governance of the hegemony in a visually arresting, non-threatening format. As the focused beam of structured light pierced the edge of the exclusion zone, the anticipation on the bridge was suffocating. For several long, silent minutes, the only input was the data stream confirming penetration of the boundary layer, followed by the immediate, absolute dissipation of the projected light packet, leaving the void exactly as sterile as before. No echo, no absorption, no reflection. It was as if the light had simply ceased to exist upon crossing an invisible meridian. Then a response. It was not a burst of energy, nor a transmission of complex data. It was a single, perfectly resolved visual image projected directly onto the primary forward display, a window that suddenly replaced the featureless void. The image was shockingly high fidelity, displaying an environment that seemed both alien and disturbingly familiar, a vast, open space filled with structured metallic forms, intricate scaffolding, and the distant, muted glow of a nearby stellar body. But the focus was on the foreground. A single, medium-sized vessel, clearly manufactured, its hull a matte gray, lacking the flamboyant, energy-harnessing ornamentation favored by the hegemony. It possessed angular, functional lines that spoke of brutal efficiency rather than aesthetic appeal. Beside this vessel, rendered in stark, unadorned detail, was a symbol, a simple circle bisected by a stylized arrow, superimposed over a field of pale blue. "Analysis of the image content," Jax ordered, suppressing a tremor of purely psychological discomfort. The image felt too close, too intrusive for a species maintaining total isolation. Xyler's optical clusters whirred rapidly. "The structure appears to be a docking bay or external maintenance yard on a station of significant mass. The atmospheric composition within the image is breathable for most Class IV biologies, though the pressure differential seems slightly elevated. The vessel, it is small, Ambassador, incredibly small for interstellar capability. Its signature suggests kinetic drive cores only with localized inertial dampening. Primitive, yes, but deployed with startling precision. And the symbol? The symbol is unidentified. It possesses no discernible symbolic resonance with any known galactic language matrix. It is geometrically pure, yet contextually empty. As Xyler spoke, the image shifted. The exterior view dissolved, replaced by an internal perspective. The transition was seamless, suggesting direct, remote ocular access to their interior network, a profound security breach achieved without any discernible exertion of force. The new view showed a chamber, clearly functional, dominated by large, illuminated screens displaying complex equations and schematics that made the hegemony's finest theoretical physics look like rudimentary arithmetic. And then there were the inhabitants. Two forms, bipedal, covered in soft, variable-colored biological coverings, their heads relatively large compared to their slender torsos. They were the humans. They moved with an almost unnerving fluid grace, their hands, 5 digits each, manipulating the holographic interfaces with swift, economical gestures. They did not appear startled, panicked, or even particularly interested in the sudden manifestation of the Kyler diplomatic probe's external visual feed within their operational center. They simply paused their work, glanced toward the implied location of the observing sensor, and one of them, a female, based on secondary analysis of mass distribution and vocal cord structure, turned directly toward the viewer. She did not recoil. She did not activate defensive measures. She simply stopped her task, and her face, a collection of asymmetrical, pale features framed by dark filaments, displayed an expression that the Kyler linguistic database struggled to categorize. Not aggression, not welcome, but a profound, almost weary expectation. Then the voice came, transmitted not through energy waves, but directly into the arbiter of Concord's communication matrix, overriding all protocols, bypassing all firewalls, perfectly translating into the complex tonal structure of the Kyler language directly into Jax's central processor. It was calm, clear, and utterly devoid of inflection that suggested fear or submission. We were expecting a more nuanced approach, hegemony. Your methodology remains predictable. You have established a perimeter. You are observing the known parameters of acceptable threat assessment. You have sent a vessel whose internal designation translates roughly to Arbiter of Concord. We acknowledge the intent. We do not, however, accept the premise of negotiation based on recognized hegemony imperial protocols. Jax felt a coldness spread through his core structure that had nothing to do with the vacuum outside. They had not only decrypted the hegemony's internal designation for the ship, but they had translated the subtle, layered philosophical implication of the name itself, a feat that required an understanding of Kyler cultural axioms that should have taken centuries to acquire. "This is Ambassador Jax of the Kyler hegemony," Jax responded, injecting carefully calibrated gravitas into his tone. "We seek dialogue regarding the imposed boundary restrictions. Your species has declared a sovereign territory that directly intersects vital infrastructure routes. We request a formal audience to discuss shared spatial stewardship." The human female offered a slight, almost imperceptible inclination of her head. "Ambassador Jax, I am designated Engineer Commander Valerius. We have already discussed stewardship via the established boundary. Stewardship in this context means absolute cessation of unauthorized ingress. Your infrastructure routes are now designated as a liability to our continued operational stability. We are not interested in dialogue regarding parameters. We are interested only in confirming your species' capacity to respect those parameters." The sheer audacity of the statement, the casual dismissal of millennia of galactic legal precedent, sent a surge of alarm through Jax's contingent. This was not a desperate, primitive species grasping for survival. This was a structured, organized entity laying down an absolute law. "Commander Valerius," Jax continued, forcing his composure to remain absolute, "the hegemony represents a coalescence of 73 established interstellar powers. We have managed peace and commerce across the entire central expanse for epochs. To unilaterally claim territory that disrupts established conduits suggests a profound misunderstanding of the galactic equilibrium. We must ascertain the justification for this unprecedented action. What is the threat you perceive that necessitates this level of isolation?" Valerius looked away from the implied camera, glancing at her colleague who nodded slowly. Then she returned her gaze, and her expression shifted subtly into something that suggested pity mixed with scientific curiosity. "The threat, Ambassador, is entropy. Yours predominantly, but ultimately the universe's. We are establishing a controlled environment. The hegemony, and indeed most expansionist empires, accelerate the rate of entropic decay through inefficient resource utilization, uncontrolled energy release, and persistent, low-level conflict." She tapped a sequence on her console, and the image on the Kyler bridge dissolved, replaced by a complex, scrolling matrix of symbols Jax had never encountered, a language that seemed built upon principles of pure mathematics rather than phonetic or syllabic construction. "This is our primary communication interface," Valerius stated. "You may begin the decryption process. We understand that the initial layers will require significant processing time for your legacy systems. We have initiated a low-power informational cascade designed to be digestible by your current level of algorithmic interpretation. It will take time. We have time." The information cascade began, a stream of data so dense, so conceptually layered, that the Arbiter of Concord's primary quantum processors immediately began to strain. It was not an attack, but an overwhelming informational generosity, a sudden, unsolicited gift of knowledge that threatened to instantly render the hegemony's entire corpus of technological understanding obsolete. "Ambassador," Xyler transmitted urgently through a secured internal channel, overriding the noise of the incoming data. "The sheer volume suggests a deliberate attempt to overload our analytical capabilities. This data stream contains structural schematics for zero-point energy harvesting that defy the known conservation laws and topological mathematics that imply mastery over macro-scale gravitational manipulation. If we attempt to process this at full capacity, we risk catastrophic system failure." Jax stared at the stream, the alien equations washing over his awareness like a tide of pure, cold truth. This species was not merely technologically superior. They operated on an entirely different stratum of physical understanding. They hadn't hidden their power. They had simply deployed it in ways the hegemony had deemed mathematically impossible. "Commander Valerius," Jax broadcasted back, his voice dangerously flat. "Your data packet is destabilizing our analysis matrices. We require a curated data transfer, scaled to our current level of comprehension. We cannot accept information that risks the integrity of our vessel." Valerius looked genuinely surprised for the first time. "Destabilization? Why would you reject efficiency? The data is the purest form of exchange. We offer knowledge freely. We offer the roadmap to transcend your current limitations." "We value stability above accelerated advancement, Commander," Jax countered, a deep philosophical chasm opening between the two empires. "Rapid, unmanaged ascension leads to instability. We have observed the pattern across countless lesser species. We choose measured, integrated growth." Valerius exchanged a glance with her colleague, and a faint, almost inaudible sound. A human chuckle escaped her. "Ah, you fear self-destruction through rapid comprehension, a fascinating evolutionary hang-up. Very well, Ambassador, we respect your self-imposed limitations. If we were to perceive your species as a threat, we would not offer you knowledge. We would simply remove the source of your conflict." The projection shifted again, moving away from the complex data displays and focusing instead on a single, unassuming piece of human technology. A sealed metallic box, roughly the size of a hegemony data slate, sitting on a workbench. "This," Valerius said, pointing directly at the box, "is a standard mid-grade data storage unit. It contains the totality of our recorded historical, scientific, and philosophical understanding up to the point of our declaration of the exclusion zone. It is self-contained, non-propagating, and requires no external energy source. We will transmit it to your vessel. Analyze the contents at your own pace. If after one standard galactic rotation, your analysis confirms that the hegemony possesses any equivalent or superior body of knowledge, we will reconsider the boundary parameters. If not, the boundary stands, and all future attempts at intrusion will be met not with correction, but with the cessation of your vessel's existence." The transmission was simple, a focused beam carrying only the compressed signature of that single box. Xyler managed to divert the energy signature without system collapse, channeling it into the Arbiter's most heavily shielded internal vault. Jax stared at the empty space where the human image had been. They had presented their entire civilization in a small, inert container, delivered via the most polite, yet chilling, means possible. It was the ultimate act of non-aggression coupled with absolute certainty. They were not hiding their power. They were showcasing their confidence in that power by offering it up for dissection, knowing the recipient would be paralyzed by the sheer scope of the comparison. "Xyler," Jax commanded, his voice resonating with a strange mix of awe and professional terror. "Prepare the Arbiter for immediate return to the Hegemony Nexus. This information package is now the single most critical asset in the Hegemony's possession. We must return to the Conclave. The nature of the threat has fundamentally shifted from territorial dispute to existential reevaluation." The silence in the command center was now different. It was not the silence of fear, but the silence of profound, world-altering comprehension dawning. The humans had not crossed into the Hegemony's space. They had simply revealed that the Hegemony existed within a vastly smaller conceptual universe than they had ever dared to imagine. The return to the Grand Conclave Hall was a blur of accelerated spatial maneuvering, yet the necessary time, 7 standard weeks, was filled with agonizing, obsessive analysis of the data packet. The Hegemony's scientific apparatus, typically slow and deliberate, was thrown into a state of frantic, unprecedented coordination, sequestered within deep vault analytical matrices protected by layers of redundant computational shielding. When Ambassador Jax finally stood before the high censor again, the atmosphere in the Conclave Hall had curdled from political fear into a pervasive, existential dread. The initial crimson glow of the disputed sector had been replaced by a dull, opaque gray, the color of absolute nullity in Hegemony spectral analysis. Vexter, whose initial arrogance had been the loudest in the chamber, now projected an aura of profound uncertainty. "Ambassador Jax, your report. Be concise. What did you discover in the void that justified abandoning the forward defense protocols?" Jax raised his segmented hands, a gesture of weary finality. "Esteemed censor delegates, we did not find a threat in the traditional sense. We found a fundamental disparity in reality processing. The species known as Terrans, humans, do not adhere to the same physical constraints as the Hegemony or indeed any known interstellar power. The data packet they transmitted is not merely advanced. It is a complete, coherent framework for physics that our highest theoretical minds previously dismissed as pure mathematics, untethered from observable reality." He paused, allowing the weight of the statement to settle. "Their energy generation methods are flawless. They draw power directly from the vacuum energy structure without measurable waste, operating with 100% efficiency. Their understanding of causality suggests they manipulate the probability wave functions of localized events. This is not advanced technology, censor. This is applied theology." Xylos the Ophidian hissed, his serpentine body coiled tight in agitation. "But their ships appeared crude. Their localized drive signatures were kinetic, Ambassador. How can a species with the mastery to achieve zero-point reality manipulation rely on the brute force of kinetic propulsion for interstellar travel?" "That," Jax explained, his voice gaining a measured strength as he spoke of the clarity he had gained from the data, "is the core of their operational ethic. Commander Valerius addressed this. They intentionally constrain their tactical deployment technology. Their kinetic vessels are designed for low observability against conventional long-range sensor nets designed by species who think only in terms of energy signatures and mass displacement. They use simple, robust technology for visible transit, while their true operational capacity, their defensive and informational architecture, is based on physics that renders conventional detection obsolete. They are masking the sun with a single, opaque curtain." The Thraxian proxy shifted, its obsidian bulk emitting a low, grinding sound of internal deliberation. If they possess this level of control over fundamental forces, why the isolation? Why not enforce hegemony-wide compliance with their entropy reduction theory? Why draw a line instead of simply imposing order? "Because," Jax stated, tapping a control that brought forth a small, distilled projection from the analysis, a depiction of a long-dead, scorched planet orbiting a decaying star, a world they had encountered during their expansion phase, a world that had destroyed itself through resource war. They understand a psychological constant we have failed to integrate into our political models. Enforced compliance, even if perfectly efficient, breeds resentment. And eventual failure. They see the hegemony, our centuries of slow, grinding expansion, our bureaucratic management of limited resources, our necessary internal conflicts, as a slow, predictable descent into thermal death. They are not conquering, They are optimizing the environment around them to ensure their long-term viability, and they see us as a persistent source of cosmological noise pollution. The Lumina delegate pulsed with a complex pattern of distress. They view our existence as inefficient noise. Not maliciously, Jax corrected quickly, recalling Valerius's calm demeanor. But logically, they have achieved a state where they possess the capacity to fully understand the consequences of their actions across vast timescales. They value control and preservation above all else. Their exclusion zone is not a territorial claim against potential invasion. It is a containment field against potential contamination by illogical, expansionist chaos. The censor finally spoke, his voice resonating with the chill of high authority confronting absolute limitation. Ambassador, the core issue remains transit. The outer rim sectors cannot be starved of resources. We cannot simply reroute established supply lines. The cost is equivalent to decades of military expenditure. Commander Valerius offered a solution, Jax continued, stepping forward, his earlier weariness replaced by the focused calm of true understanding. They do not object to transit itself. They object to the method and the intent. They have provided a pathway. The projection shifted again, showing a diagram of the Solarian exclusion zone, but overlaid upon it were new lines. Thin, barely visible filaments of stabilized spatial geometry running perpendicular to the major hegemony warp conduits. Have engineered localized, stable, traversable wormholes, not warp jumps but true instantaneous transit vectors that bypass the contested space entirely. These vectors are self-correcting, requiring negligible external power input to maintain stability. They are functionally a network of permanent, perfectly safe transit points. However, Jax warned, these points are accessible only via protocols they dictate. They transmit the access sequence for the first 3 transit nodes. The sequence is a complex, multi-factor encryption based on principles of probabilistic shielding we did not know existed. They are offering us the keys to bypass their quarantine, but only if we agree to use their designated roads. Vexter leaned back, his relief warring with his outrage. They offer us a lifeline contingent upon subservience to their pathway structure. This is political subjugation disguised as engineering assistance. It is survival disguised as engineering assistance, Elder Vexter, Jax retorted, his patience finally thinning at the political myopia. If we attempt to brute force our way through their exclusion zone, we risk, and this is my sober assessment based on the data, the immediate and total annihilation of our exploratory fleet, followed by the construction of a secondary, far more aggressive exclusion zone that encompasses the next 5 hegemony sectors. They have the capacity to delete systems. They are offering us the courtesy of a service elevator. The debate devolved into a furious, desperate political skirmish. The Lumina feared loss of autonomy. The Thraxian proxies feared technological dependence. The Ophidians feared the precedent of bowing to an unassimilated power. But the censor observed the data streams constantly displayed on the peripheral monitors, the undeniable proof of human physics, and his decision was absolute. We accept the transit corridors, the censor announced, silencing the chamber with a single, decisive wave of his manipulator. Ambassador Jax, you will lead the initial diplomatic envoy through the designated node. You will convey our acceptance of the transit arrangement and petition for a full, formal cultural exchange, one predicated on the hegemony's commitment to rigorous self-assessment and non-interference with the Solarian designation. It was the closest the Kyler hegemony had ever come to admitting definitive inferiority. They were not facing a military rival. They were facing a superior civilization that had chosen introspection over empire, and in doing so, had achieved a level of security that transcended warfare. The human achievement was not in their weapons, but in their decision not to use them broadly. The passage through the first transit node was an experience that fractured the mental models of every Kyler aboard the Arbiter of Concord. There was no sensation of acceleration, no gravitational strain, no distortion of light or time. One moment they were observing the edge of the gray nullity near the boundary. The next, they were emerging into a fully illuminated, vibrant stellar system entirely unknown to hegemony charting, a place of stable, orange-yellow stars and woe. RLDS rich in pre-established, non-aggressive orbital infrastructure. The exit point was perfectly defined, a shimmering, temporary aperture that sealed itself instantly upon the Arbiter's passage. Ambassador Jax stood on the bridge, feeling the familiar, comforting weight of standard ship gravity settling around him, a gravity they maintained deliberately, the data confirmed to reassure lesser species. He looked out at the alien, yet strangely ordered starscape. They were immediately hailed, not by a warship but by a small, swift vessel, a counterpart to the one seen in the initial communication, painted a crisp, reflective white. It approached with measured deceleration, matching the arbiter's speed precisely, maintaining a distance that suggested caution but not hostility. "They are requesting docking clearance at a designated orbital station," Zyler reported, his tone betraying professional admiration. "The station appears to be primarily residential and research-focused. No visible heavy defense platforms. Their entire posture is one of hospitality overlaid with rigorous security protocols." "Accept the clearance," Jax ordered. "Maintain the hegemony diplomatic buffer protocols. We are guests entering a highly controlled environment. They have granted us passage. We will honor the implied contract of behavior." Docking was a precise ballet of mutual adherence to established maneuvers. As the airlock cycled, a surprisingly swift vacuum-sealing process, the feeling of being observed intensified. This was not the paranoid watchfulness of a besieged nation, but the methodical scrutiny of a laboratory supervisor watching a new, highly complex variable enter the system. When the inner hatch opened, the air was warm, carrying a faint, clean scent reminiscent of ozone and processed plant matter. Waiting for them were 3 humans. They wore simple, functional attire, their movements economical. Engineer Commander Valerius was immediately recognizable, standing centrally. Beside her stood a tall male human whose face was lined with deeper expression, and a third, younger human whose focus seemed entirely fixed on the data readouts Giant Jax knew they were broadcasting openly. Valerius stepped forward, extending one of her 5-fingered appendages in a gesture that the Kyler database provisionally labeled as a handshake, a transfer of physical contact indicating non-aggression. "Ambassador Jax, welcome to the edge of Solarian territory. We appreciate your species' capacity for rapid self-correction regarding threat assessment. Please follow us. We have prepared a secure environment for your initial diplomatic processing." Jax, using his translation systems to mimic the necessary inflection, returned the gesture, touching her appendage briefly. The texture was warm, pliable, disturbingly organic. "Commander Valerius, the Kyler hegemony extends its gratitude for the provision of safe passage and the unexpected clarity provided by your data transmission. We are eager to establish a basis for mutual respect." As they were escorted through the corridors of the station, corridors made of pale, smooth material that absorbed sound and reflected light softly, the psychological contrast was stark. The hegemony operated through overwhelming scale and layered, ritualized bureaucracy. The humans operated through immediate functionality and minimalist design. Everything was designed for direct action, devoid of the ornamentation or the heavy symbolic layering that defined Kyler civilization. They entered a large chamber, elegantly sparse, dominated by a single panoramic view of the distant, familiar stars they had left behind, filtered through the stable geometry of the transit exit. "Ambassador, let us dispense with unnecessary formality," Valerius began, motioning for them to be seated on low, ergonomically designed chairs that subtly adapted to Kyler morphology. "We have shared our physical laws. You have demonstrated your willingness to abide by our existential boundary. Now we must discuss why we are here, and why our existence matters to the wider stability you claim to uphold." The tall male human, introduced simply as Strategist Corvin, spoke next, his voice deeper, more resonant than Valerius's. "Your hegemony, Ambassador, is vast but brittle. Your expansion relies on managing scarcity across hundreds of isolated systems, leading to inherent political friction and predictable cyclical conflicts over resources and transit lanes. We observed this pattern for centuries before establishing our boundary." "We call that necessary governance," Jax stated stiffly. "The management of complex, disparate populations requires stringent organizational structures." Corvin smiled faintly, a disconcerting flexing of facial muscles. "You manage scarcity. We eliminated it locally. The true lesson of the data we sent you, the physics you are currently struggling to integrate, is not how to build better engines. It is how to build a sustainable existence that requires no expansion. We have achieved self-sufficiency within our own system, an equilibrium state that consumes only the minimum viable energy required for local maintenance. We are, in essence, an island of perfect conservation in an ocean of entropic waste." The younger human, who specialized in computational ethics, added quietly, "Your galactic governance model, Ambassador, is predicated on the acquisition of more energy and more space to house your expanding needs. This inherently necessitates friction with all neighbors. We reject that premise. We have no need for your territory, your resources, or your political structure. We require only the right to exist, untouched, at this level of efficiency." Jax felt the carefully constructed arguments he had rehearsed for the conclave dissolving under the sheer, quiet logic of their position. They weren't competing for influence. They were opting out of the game entirely, having achieved a state of perpetual stalemate simply by becoming unnecessary to the external structure. "But Commander," Jax pressed, trying to find the flaw in their insulation, "if you possess this power, the ability to manipulate spacetime stability, why not use it to enforce galactic peace? To enforce your concept of efficiency on the wider galaxy? Your actions suggest a profound moral imperative to prevent entropy, yet you refuse to apply your solution universally." Valerius leaned forward, her eyes locking onto Jax's primary sensor cluster. This was the crucial philosophical pivot. Because, Ambassador, forcing adherence to a higher standard is the very definition of invasive chaos. We observe the precursors to the hegemony's current structure in other species. The Ethel's Great Unification, the Xylo's Directive, all began with noble intentions of efficiency, and all ended in catastrophic implosion because they tried to impose a monolithic, top-down structure onto diverse realities. True sustainability is local, self-determined, and voluntary. "We are ethical," Corvin added, his tone devoid of arrogance, purely descriptive. "We protect what is ours, and we do not impose our methods on those who have not invited them. Your species are currently demonstrating the capacity to learn through observation and careful integration. We permit this. If your analysis of our physics confirms our superiority, the logical conclusion for the hegemony is to cease outward expansion and turn that considerable energy inward, to solve your own scarcity model. That is your path to survival. We will not walk it for you, nor will we destroy you for choosing the harder path." The conversation continued for several standard Kyler cycles, moving from physics to political philosophy, from technological comparison to ethical frameworks. The humans were calm, precise, and unwavering. They possessed a deep, almost clinical understanding of the hegemony's internal political frailties, derived not from espionage but from modeling chaotic systems. They didn't fear the hegemony's military. They pitied its administrative complexity. The culmination came when Valerius guided Jax to a section of the station dedicated to ecological observation. It was a vast dome displaying a perfect, meticulously preserved terrestrial ecosystem, the original home world of humanity, displayed not as a historical artifact, but as a living, thriving model of closed-loop sustainment. "Ambassador," Valerius said softly, gesturing to the vibrant green and blue sphere under the artificial sun, "we did not leave Earth because we were forced out. We left because we realized, after immense conflict and near self-annihilation, that true expansion is not about conquering new territory. It is about perfecting the territory you already possess. We mastered local conservation until we reached a point where we needed nothing more from the void. We drew the line not to keep others out, but to prevent the noise of the outside, the constant demand for more, from disrupting the fragile equilibrium we had fought so hard to establish." She then directed Jax's attention to a small, secondary display embedded near the dome's edge. This display showed the energy signature of the Solarian exclusion zone, the silent, impenetrable barrier that had terrified the hegemony. "What you observed as a passive, impenetrable defense grid," Valerius explained, "is not primarily a defense. It is a massive, distributed computational array. It monitors the quantum stability of local space. It filters out cosmic background radiation that could introduce unpredictable variables into our controlled environment. It is functionally a giant, silent library." "A library?" Jax queried, confusion evident in his tone. "Yes, Ambassador. While we were perfecting our local reality, we needed an unparalleled data storage medium that was utterly immune to external manipulation, noise, or cosmic degradation. The exclusion zone is constructed from stab. Alized, entangled particles held in a state of superposition across vast distances. It is the most secure, non-volatile data storage medium ever conceived. It stores everything we have ever learned about physics, history, and philosophy. It is the repository of our chosen path." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the vastness of the dome. And it also monitors the galaxy for signs of intelligent life that has achieved a similar, voluntary state of equilibrium. We are waiting for others to find the logic in non-expansion. This was the true reveal. The boundary wasn't a wall to keep enemies out. It was a hard drive and a cosmic listening post established by a species that had decided galactic mastery was a distraction from true, sustainable enlightenment. Their power was not military, it was epistemological. "But you have shared knowledge with us, Commander," Jax observed, struggling to reconcile the immense data he now possessed with the ethical framework of isolation. "You have breached your own self-imposed isolation by giving us the keys to the first 3 transit nodes and the foundational physics required to potentially follow your path." Valerius nodded, a gesture of solemnity. "We have, because your reaction to our initial boundary declaration showed a capacity for strategic retreat and analytical engagement that surpassed our baseline projections for a Type 0 civilization. We are not willing to allow an existential threat, one that could accidentally destabilize the entire local spatial configuration, to remain unmanaged. You have proven you can listen. Now you must prove you can learn." The younger human stepped forward, pointing to a subtle anomaly flickering briefly on the edge of the external view. A distant, almost imperceptible ripple near the edge of the newly accessible Solarian domain. "Ambassador," the ethicist said, the weariness in his voice now fully present, "our primary function of the perimeter array is not just to keep the noise out, but to monitor for a specific type of signal. When we detected your approach, we confirmed that the hegemony, while inefficient, was not the primary threat we were designed to counter." "Then what is?" Jax demanded, feeling the philosophical dread of the conclave morph into a sharp, immediate military concern. "The signal," Corvin stated, his relaxed posture instantly vanishing, replaced by the hard focus of a deployed commander. "The signal we were designed to detect has just spiked. It is ancient, powerful, and heading directly toward the established core of the hegemony. It is not a signal of civilization, Ambassador. It is a signal of cosmic reclamation." Valerius turned fully to Jax, her expression grim. "We did not draw a line to keep you out, Ambassador. We drew a line to build a defense capable of handling the real threat that necessitated our isolation in the first place. The hegemony's current military posture, its vast, energy-intensive fleet movements across the central quadrant, has finally produced enough localized entropy that it has triggered a beacon. The hegemony's chaotic expansion has just advertised its location to something that fears, and seeks to eliminate, the very concept of uncontrolled expansion." The implication hung in the air, vast and terrible. Humanity had not feared the hegemony. They had been protecting them unknowingly by building a silent shield across the void, while the hegemony blithely consumed resources and built fleets, unaware they were painting a target on their own stellar neighborhood. The humans were not merely advanced. They were the galaxy's only functioning early warning system. "We are now allied," Valerius announced, her voice regaining its professional composure, though the urgency was undeniable. "The transit corridors are open to your military assets immediately. We will share the counter-strategy data, but there is no time for debate on ethics. You must learn survival principles at impossible speed. Ambassador Jax, return to your conclave. Tell them that the Kyler hegemony has just been invited into humanity's perimeter, not as subjects, but as necessary reinforcements against a threat that views inefficient life as a universal contamination." Jax stood, the cold, logical certainty of the human perspective finally sinking in, stripping away millennia of imperial pride. They had been fighting over territory while an ancient, terrifying predator was drawn by the smoke of their activity. Humanity had seen the shadow coming, drawn their line, and now, in the face of true cosmic threat, they were offering the only path to survival, a path forged in pure, ruthless efficiency and ethical self-preservation. The age of hegemony dominance was over. The age of painful, necessary learning, under the quiet, watchful eye of humanity, had just begun. The cinematic scope of the threat was now clear. It was not merely empires clashing, but order versus an entity that sought absolute, sterile stillness. Across the cosmos,